Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. As we begin the month of September, the first in all of our lifetimes without Michigan or Big Ten football, there are efforts underway to establish if and when a late fall or winter season can get underway. With us on our game day segment will be one of our favorites, Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic, with his thoughts on what's going on behind the scenes and much more. The pressure on Big Ten presidents and chancellors to reverse their decision, or at least revisit it, has been a hot topic in the last week. Even President Trump is getting involved. On Tuesday, he spoke with Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren and asked him to do all possible to get the season started now. He even offered to pay for testing if that would help with the decision. Last week, Big Ten officials told us they were working on a winter schedule, with games being played in domed stadiums. A January or February start was being discussed. Then on Tuesday, Dan Patrick reported on ESPN that his sources were saying that if testing processes can be put in place soon, we might get the season started as early as October 10th. Are any of these stories true? We have no idea. While the Big Ten presidents are brilliant men, they have proven to be poor communicators during this entire process. So while it sounds like we might have a schedule soon, let's not get our hopes up. My guest today says he feels bad for the players and coaches, and yes, even the Big Ten presidents. Up next on our Game Day segment with his thoughts on all of this is Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic, here on this week's edition of The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment this week is Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic, who covers Michigan, Michigan State, and the Lions very well, as we all know. Been a long time, Nick. It's finally great to get you back on the show.
Yeah, Mike, good to hear from you.
Well, you know, if life was normal, this weekend we'd be previewing Michigan's opener. Instead, we're dealing with the controversy surrounding the Big Ten decision to postpone the season and what's next, which we'll talk about in a minute. But at least you have the Lions to give you fresh material right now.
Yeah, I do have that, so that's something. That's something. Although the Lions have also been in a weird scenario with we just had the 2 weeks there that we got to see at camp. They'll start here in less than 2 weeks, so pretty crazy times. A lot of crazy stuff right now, Mike, with football, because nobody had any time, in the spring or the summer or anything else. Like, everything is so new. In some ways, the NFL practices have felt a little bit like college practices, in that they had to be shorter, so they were faster. The hours were being counted and all these things. Yeah. So I was starting to get flashbacks from the times we have seen practice and everything else. So I don't know how it's all going to go, but it's been interesting so far, to say the least.
Well, at least we'll have football soon. But as far as Michigan and college football, controversy continues to swirl based on the Big Ten's decision to postpone football. That was made back in early August. Big Ten players and their parents, the Nebraska lawsuit, which was in the news on Monday, are all certainly ratcheting up the pressure on Big Ten administrations, aren't they, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, it's been it's been a frustrated month, for a month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it's been, for a lot of folks. I think really that starts, when you talk about Big Ten parents and players and coaches too, and athletic directors. So I think that's important to note. Everybody that was on the ground, so to speak, is what I've kind of come to describe it as. That everybody was when the schools started to bring students back in, I want to say it was June, somewhere in June, probably something like that, and told them, we're going to have health and safety protocols, and we're going to put you through rigorous testing, and we're going to need you to, basically quarantine yourself and be diligent with this and everything else, and we'll see what happens, right? And so they all went through all this, and, it was an anxiety-filled situation, to say the least. It was, filled with uncertainty and everything else, but, all these teams, some better than others, on campus, on other campuses everywhere else, did everything they could to go through it. And then on the football standpoint, they did it for 6 to 8 weeks, whatever it was. And, the gravest mistake, I think, Mike, from the Big Ten standpoint here, was when they released that schedule on that Wednesday, somewhere, the first week of August, whatever it was, somewhere in there. And then, 3 days later, whatever it was, turn around and suddenly are terrified and want to back out and cancel everything. And that's what it looked like. And I don't know if that's what it was. I don't know if that's the exact situation that happened. If I had my guesses, that was trending that way for some time. It's not my guesses. If I had my, from talking to folks, it was trending that way for some time. But the error there, I think, was in that, giving a lot of false hope. I think they allowed, people on the ground to operate as if, they had a grander plan for playing football in the fall. And I just don't know if that plan really existed. I think the plan, it seemed like to me, was to let them work as long as they could. And then, the end result was always going to be the same. We're not playing in the fall. And, that's what it appeared. That's what it appears to be anyway, from the outside looking in. We don't have all the answers from the Big Ten, of course. But when you talk to people around that decision on the outside anyway, not a president, I guess, but people around them, that seemed to be kind of the vibe that it was going, though the public was starting to get of the assumption with, testing advances and everything else, that maybe this would be possible. And then, boom, the rug gets pulled. And it was heartbreaking for everybody. That was a really brutal week, day, whatever, that whole thing. You felt just terrible for all those kids, and, all the gripes that went up from players, coaches, and even ADs, frankly, probably in private, I'll say, it seemed warranted to me, because the presidents run the Big Ten. Kevin Warren doesn't run the Big Ten. The presidents run the Big Ten. They made a decision. They didn't offer a lot of communication with folks that they knew were going to be directly impacted by that. Maybe for a reason, maybe to keep themselves, away from, other influences to stick forward and make this decision. But it was just a really messy process. It was probably always going to be kind of a messy process, but you can understand the frustration on the parental side, the player side, but I can also understand it on everybody's. I mean, it's been a really challenging deal that a lot of this, so much of this, we can't, it's out of your own individual control. It's about what other people do or don't do. And, it's been really difficult. Hopefully they can figure something out as they move forward here, a plan, what have you, maybe to do something in the winter, spring, whatever it is. It doesn't seem like they're going to double back on the fall scenario, and I suppose we'll see if the rest of the leagues play as well.
Well, as you mentioned, it's been very messy. Monday of this week, the Big Ten Conference released a brief in response to the Nebraska players in that lawsuit. And it said the presidents and the chancellors voted 11-3 to postpone fall sports. And, sort of two things with that jumped out at me. For weeks we've heard from some of those chancellors and presidents there was no vote. It was some kind of a consensus. And the way I've heard it explained is very odd. But
right.
The other thing, who were those three teams that voted to play? There was a guess made, but I don't think it was actually in that brief. But that response, the brief, in my opinion, sort of amplifies the lack of transparency that's really plagued this process, Nick.
Yeah, the whole thing has been, this entire pandemic, I think, has shed so much light on, some of the issues that have been there for a long time that people have sort of kicked the can down the road on. And one of which is, the structure of college football that, Mike, you and I know this, we cover college football, but I think the general average fan who, casually observes college football would have no way of knowing, because they'd have no reason to get into the weeds on this. But the presidents of these universities, who are also in charge of, you look at like Mark Schlissel at Michigan, the number of things that, he has on his plate, lawsuits in other areas of campus, or, other things going on right now, including the restart of, general students and everything else that goes on with that. Also on his plate is, one vote out of 14 that decides, everything within the Big Ten, which, as we know, is $1 billion operation at this point. And the structure is set up in a way that these presidents, who are completely distracted by 5,000 other things that may or may not be more important, a lot of them are more important, if we're honest, are also tasked with running this whole thing. It doesn't make any sense. They don't have the type of skin in the game, that a person would on the ground. They don't, they can't put themselves in those shoes, and sometimes there's a lot of disconnect with that. And with that also, there's a lot of, lack of communication between, and, it just doesn't make much sense. And college football is different from this. The NCAA has more sway with college basketball, but college football in the Power Five has been broken off. So there's no one really in charge, as we've seen. There's no one at the top that can sort of unify all this. And I think the Big Ten's original hope was that all of these leagues would come together and say, we're not playing. Well, I mean, that, if you want to criticize Kevin Warren for something, that was it right there. Because I think Kevin Warren's job as commissioner is to inform the presidents, keep them up to date on everything that's happening, and give them, basically be their conduit to, you are our eyes and ears in the football world of what's going on, and we need to be informed by you to make our decisions that way. If they thought they had any hope of getting the SEC, let alone the Big 12 and the ACC, but if they thought they had any hope of getting the SEC to agree to cancel or postpone a season on August 11th, that was so short-sighted, and it was just never going to happen. So suddenly they look like they're out there on their own, and everything becomes messy. And then, you're going to see a lot of stuff come out in litigation now, as a lot of these lawsuits, I think, are basically designed to, go as far as discovery will take it, so that some of this stuff can come out in terms of, what you're able to get out within a lawsuit and everything else. And it's a huge, giant mess. I think that there was no other way that it was going to end based on the way they sort of tiptoed through all this. And that was it. I mean, even when the kids came back in June, there wasn't Big Ten protocols. There was, you figure it out, at your school level. And it was just like, and it was like that all the way from the top on down within the structure of everything. So, there's no one at the top of college football, so it trickles all the way down to each league, which then trickles all the way down to each school, and it's total chaos. And, the sport needs, and that's if I have a frustration that's sort of been unvoiced by a lot of folks, it's that we're spending a lot of time right now sort of arguing about things that we can't really change when there's so much wrong about this sport that continues to sort of be that way, that needs to be changed. And number one on the list, or toward the top of it anyway, would be the overall structure is a mess. The kids don't get paid. We're talking about putting college basketball players in a bubble in the spring, and we're not talking about, we're not spending more time talking about NIL and making sure these kids. I mean, it's such a mess. It's all over the place. I think that the Big Ten, obviously there was a lot of probably missteps there from a communication standpoint, from a PR standpoint, but probably also from just a general common sense standpoint. I mean, the number of smart football people and other sports too on these campuses is just, you have resources that they didn't use. I mean, there's people on the ground that could have helped inform them and would have, I think, people get that cliche of, well, the football coaches only wanted to play and they were going to just blindly walk into this and ignore. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I would go that far. I think that if they would have engaged maybe more with some people on the ground, maybe they could have come to a better workable decision that would have at least been something that everybody could have been on board with, or been maybe more excited or motivated to work toward. Instead, it was just a kind of a mishmash mess, and there you go.
Yeah, I think what we've learned in this entire process is that each conference does their own thing, as you said, and we have the NCAA out there somewhere, and there has to be some form of reorganization. This is amplified what we've known all along, that there are structuring and restructuring issues that need to be taken care of. Nick Saban, I thought, said something that Nick Saban can say. He was talking last week at one of his pressers about, look what the Big Ten's doing. Look at what the Pac-12 is doing. Where is the leadership? And he was saying, maybe we need a commissioner of sorts, if not for college football. But, I think a lot of people have said that before. But when Nick said it, maybe people started to pay attention. I think he's right. Yeah,
I think it's one thing I would also say to some of these coaches, be careful what you wish for, right? Yeah, because if you get a commissioner in there and that commissioner says, I'm going to start cracking down on some of this stuff, we might be having different conversations within 2 years. But either way, no, I mean, they do need to have, people have labeled it a czar or whatever it is. They do somebody or a body of some sort that, because that's the thing to remember is the Power Five in football broke away from a lot of the NCAA structure. They don't operate under the same rules as the Group of Five in a lot of cases. They it became the rich schools, the schools with all the money, had the ability to sort of maneuver through things the way that schools without any money, couldn't do. So they wanted that flexibility. I mean, they've just sort of like inch by centimeter by centimeter sort of tried to break away, or, people have fought against it and everything else. And it just never gets anywhere. And every time it feels like there's any progress being made on some of these fronts, to make this thing more equitable, to be realistic about the fact that, it's $1 billion operation and the players, I mean, they get scholarships, but let's be fair here. I mean, that's a fraction of what is probably owed to them. I mean, to continue to turn a blind eye to all that sort of thing as well on top of everything else, and then you get into a situation like this where there is no leadership and there is no structure, and it was doomed to fail before it started. The college football was never going to smoothly operate inside of a pandemic. Nothing was going to smoothly operate inside of a pandemic, but, oftentimes I think fans of college athletics are also fans of professional sports, and they like to sort of compare the two sometimes. And, I always warn people, like, you can't do that. They're so different. It's completely different worlds. And what you've seen with the NBA and NFL and NHL and all those leagues have had their own issues. But bottom line is they're all privately owned, for-profit leagues where, players earn salaries. They have jobs, and they're told, your job's going to be here on Monday. We're starting. You're going to come and play, and that's going to be that. And everybody knows what they're supposed to do. There's a commissioner running the whole thing. Everybody operates from the ground up, and there's a players union, there's representation, there's all these things that we don't have any of it in college athletics. So what you have is 14 presidents who may or may not know much about football at all or care to know much about football deciding all of this. And it's been that way forever. And people could argue it's worked that way forever, but people could also argue on the other side, well, no, it really hasn't. It's just been kind of a frustrating thing forever. In some ways, that used to be kind of the charm of college football, that it was kind of weird. But I think most folks have gotten beyond that now to a point of, if you're going to invest your time into this, you'd like it to be, at least somewhat fair across the board, somewhat even across the board. All the other stuff that we talk about in any other year, Mike, about one league doing one thing and playing by its own rules, another league doing another thing. The playoff competitively. Do we need better scheduling? Do we not? So this league's refusing to do it. That league's going to do it. I mean, the whole thing has been so ridiculous. And I feel like we make so many excuses for it because we just want to see it over the years. I really do hope that, whenever we can get back to playing regularly in the fall, that before then we have some really, deep and meaningful discussions that result in change in terms of the structure of the sport, because it desperately needs something right now more than probably ever.
One of the things, though, the chancellors, the president said in early August when they postponed the season, Nick, was that testing was really a big concern.
Right.
It was mentioned in the brief yesterday that was released on Monday, the Nebraska lawsuit. Since August, things really are changing fast. I mean, the COVID rapid test was FDA approved maybe a week or so ago, and it's being hailed as a game changer. I mean, even high school teams around the country are using it because it's relatively inexpensive, and it's, again, deemed to be highly accurate by the FDA. Testing, we know, is a major factor in the Big Ten's decision not to play. So I would think at this point, with all of the discussions going on and advancements like that, that addresses a major concern that the chancellors and presidents had 3 weeks ago, doesn't it, Nick?
I think so. I do. And I think, the way it was put to me at the time was, I think a lot of people it was put to them as well the same way, was, that we'll know more about everything in the spring. We'll know more about everything in the winter. Just inevitably, we'll know more about testing, and we'll have better, everything in a couple months down the road. That was basically the thought. Now, if you argue against that and say maybe that was short-sighted in terms of, we're knowing more, now, it seems like every couple of weeks, we're starting to know a little bit more. And the testing, like you said, Mike, has changed, improved, quite a bit in that time. And that was, concern at the time, was there was so many tests that took so much time. They cost a lot of money. I mean, you look at the MAC, the Mid-American. I mean, they canceled before the Big Ten, and I think they would have liked to say at the time, I think, that they were doing it for the betterment of the public good, which is true, on some level. But the other part of that's true, is that they couldn't have afforded the testing model. There's no way it wouldn't have worked the way that it was structured at the time. Maybe now, I don't know if it'd be different, but I mean, at the time it was a high cost. It was also taking tests. I think the concern was it was taking tests from the community, in some cases where, maybe these communities needed the tests for the public. And you're talking about, testing football players however many times a week and things of that nature, lacrosse players and everything else. So that was a concern as well. But those things, as we go forward here, seem to be lessened a little bit with each sort of advancement in all of that. And, it was put to me the other day, I think, with the rapid ones, in theory, if you wanted to, you could test a kid before practice and after practice, and then, and that way, I mean, it's so quick. I mean, in 15 minutes, I think, with 97% accuracy, that would limit on your contact tracing. You'd only have to go back a certain amount of time as opposed to prior time. So all of it looks more manageable now in terms of the testing, standpoint. I think the one thing that the Big Ten has cited is the heart condition. sort of freaked them out. I don't know all the details on all that in terms of, if that's something that will still be there for them in the winter or whatever else. But, it does seem like the testing will be more manageable. However, at the same time, anyone who sort of is operating under the assumption that they could just kick the can down to January, snap their fingers, and be playing football, no. I mean, a lot of things are still going to have to probably be, improved by then, because the other crowd would say, well, what really will change by January? In some cases, you say, well, I mean, are the numbers going to go all the way down the way you want it? Are we going to have a vaccine? We might not. So is that going to change anything? I think, it's what their criteria is for what's safe and what's not, I think is the thing that is driving. I know that's the thing that's driving the parents crazy, and the coaches too, and everybody. It's what is your threshold for, we need this in place or we need that in place. And I don't know if the Big Ten even knows that, to be totally honest, if they have like a defined set of answers. And that also is, maybe they do, but they're hiding it for some reason, which doesn't make any sense. And that's what's frustrating folks is what would it take, right? Like what would need to happen, and a lot of that is beyond people's control anyway, but like even for peace of mind, I think in a lot of cases, like, what are the odds, this, that, and the other. We're so far down into this thing now that I think that, the Big Ten needs to be beyond being worried about giving people false hope, because they already did that and they ripped it away from them. So at this point, I think the best course of action is to probably be as transparent as possible. That doesn't seem like it's happening as much, although it does seem like Kevin Warren is offering some answers to parents a little bit here and there. I'm not sure all the details on that one, but hopefully I think is the best. But I think there's more optimism today about, from people I talk to anyway, it seems like there's more optimism that it's doable. There was optimism that it was doable back in the summer. It just wasn't as widespread. I think that there was fewer people back then that would have told you, I think we can do this. And now it seems like there's more people that are saying, I think we can do this. Whether or not they actually believe it, I guess is probably to each their own. But I don't know. It's a really tough situation. I mean, hopefully something workable can happen. We've seen all the plans and read all the stuff about, maybe early January, maybe a little bit later. I don't know. But hopefully something can take place. Because if for no other reason, a lot of these guys, you're losing a year of advancement in your chosen craft. And I think that's the one thing that, I know Jim Harbaugh's voiced that, and I know a lot of other coaches have too, that the bottom line here, for all the money aside, everything else, like these guys are losing a year of development and work and tape and everything else. And this is their chosen career path. And that is something that I think another thing we need to remember here. This is 2020. Most kids, I don't want to say every kid, but most kids who take a Division I Power 5 scholarship to play football at a place like Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, they want to play in the NFL. And part of the way they get there is by developing and playing in college. And you're taking away 1 year of that from them. Yes, they can go to class and you can do all those things, and that's great, and that's part of the experience as well. But to act like football isn't a chosen career path at this point is just ridiculous. I mean, you're taking that away from folks, and that's a challenge for a lot of people to cross, because that's a career. You're telling people, you're getting in the way of them, getting a job in some cases, and if you really want to boil it down. And I think that's how some people look at it, and I can't fault them for being upset about that.
This whole eligibility thing, Nick, was addressed in a way for fall athletes last week, that they would be given the option of returning next year, I think, if they chose to do so. That would change, though, if football is played late fall or early winter, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I mean, that's another great question, because I mean, I've thought about that myself. Like if you played like a 6-game schedule or something in January, would that be like? And if you're Aiden Hutchinson, Aiden Hutchinson this fall would have been a junior. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that Aiden Hutchinson would? And I don't know if Aiden Hutchinson would stay till a senior year anyway. But does that mean that Aiden Hutchinson would be a junior in the winter and then a senior in the fall? I don't know. That's weird.
Yeah.
As well, like I almost feel like it should be, those players should be a junior all of next year, and then in 2021 they're a senior. Now, I don't know how that's going to work, because you're going to have a giant bottleneck with your, the scholarship numbers are now going to be expanded for that year with the extra eligibility. You got kids coming in.
Yeah.
What are the schools going to have to do? The schools are going to have to ensure those scholarships for everybody, including kids who've opted out and everything else. I don't know how that's all going to look. I don't know if they know yet. And that's another add it to the mountain of things here that, there is no uniformity in college football. So those answers, I mean, the Big Ten and the Power Five, they look to the NCAA for guidance on some things, not everything. And I mean, when I say this, you say this stuff out loud and you just like, it's ridiculous to even say, but that's how it goes. And I don't know all the details on how all that's going to work, but, boy, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be messy for a minute because there's going to be a lot of kids coming in, a lot of kids that are going to want to stay, a lot of kids that are going to want to go. Maybe it'll work itself out, but I mean, you're taking away a lot of options from some kids, and I think that's important to remember too, and that's another part of the frustration as well.
Another thing I've been wondering about is what about these kids that announced they were making themselves available for the NFL draft from the Big Ten and other schools? Can they still play this winter if they haven't signed with an agent? We've never gone through a situation like this before.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would assume that if they've signed, then they would tell them, under the current rules. I'm not sure what. I think that's been another thing that's been, bandied back and forth, like, with the way college basketball is right now. And I think in college sports in general, they're getting more accepting of agents and agents' roles. So, maybe that'll change. But the other problem with that would be, so if you're Jalen Mayfield or Ambry Thomas, who've declared for the draft, the combine, the draft does not look like it's moving back. I don't think the NFL has any plans, or at least they haven't voiced those plans to move anything back. If the combine is in February or March or whatever, some version of it, if they can hold it in February, March, maybe they won't be able to, but if they can, they're going to do it. And if you're playing college football at that time and you need to go to the, so they're going to be you're going to be competing against, do you want to play in college or do you want to go get ready to play in the NFL? Like, that's going to be kind of the thing. I think that those kids are going to have to be forced to decide earlier than they would have normally had to decide it. I think that's part of an issue as well, in that, if you've declared already today and you've said, I'm leaving school, I don't know that Jalen Mayfield or Ambry Thomas have left school, but if they declared in August and they could leave school if they wanted and go train, are you even part of the school anymore at that point, when winter comes? So that's, that ship, it looks like to me, if a guy has made that decision, I would probably bet that player is all in on that decision, and that'll be what happens as they move forward. I don't know that it would be impossible for them to revert on that, but we get asked about that sort of thing a lot. Yeah. And I know in college basketball, they have the ability to sort of go in and come back. Maybe they could work something out where that would be possible as well. After next year's draft, if the kid goes because he was uncertain, doesn't get drafted, maybe he can come back. I don't know if that's been there's so many things that have been bandied about. It's hard to keep track of everything right now, but maybe that's something that they could come up with as well. But again, that would also add to the, now how many more scholarships are we supposed to have here? We're already at 85. I mean, we're going to be in the hundreds now. I mean, how much higher does it need to go? I don't know. So the numbers game is a really big, giant, unsolved part of this whole deal that, I still don't think everybody has answers for it.
Well, Nick, there's been a lot of talk that if the SEC, ACC, Big 12 played and the season went off reasonably well, that would be bad for the Big 10 and the Pac-12 and for the others who aren't playing. In what ways would that impact be felt most, Nick?
Well, I think it's already been bad for the Big 10 from a public trust standpoint. That's been blown up. I think that the one thing that, people criticized Jim Delaney for years and years and years, some of it fair, some of it not fair. I think it comes with the territory. But the one thing that you could say about Jim Delaney's Big 10 is that it was always, under no circumstances was it not unified. And it's no longer unified. I mean, you're 1 year into Kevin Warren's reign, and that's gone. And so that right there is, for a lot of people that were longtime Big Ten associated people that have been around the league for a long, long time, this whole thing was so jarring because we just never saw that sort of disconnect played out in public when Delaney was running things. And we also, to be fair, we didn't have a pandemic. So,
right.
That's one of those things that could have happened. It might have happened that way anyway, but that's one thing that sort of jarred folks. I don't know how to go into that. I think that the bottom line would be if the other leagues played, and those guys got, those players got one more year of football training, game tape, everything else, would that give them an advantage over the rest of those players who didn't get to play, who didn't get to advance their careers one more year, realistically anyway? That's not fair. Would it impact would it have impact in terms of, recruiting down the road? I don't know that. I mean, some of this stuff I liken back to, do you remember when, like, I don't think it was that long ago when Jim Delaney was still around, and he kind of floated the idea of freshman ineligibility.
Right.
And everybody freaked out. Remember this? Like,
right.
Everybody was like, there's no way, you can't do that. No one will ever sign with the Big Ten again, all this. And of course, before it even got started, they nixed it. This is what this sort of reminds me of a little bit, in that the Big Ten is, kind of taken one side of the fence here, and that they don't believe that college football or college athletics, really, it seems, are essential in this environment, where the rest of those leagues have determined, yes, we do believe that they are essential. And I think that, for a lot of people, that's something that they're going to have to square with themselves. I don't know how it'll impact, beyond the fact that all these schools are going to lose a bunch of money, and these athletic departments are going to be ravaged by it and everything else. That's obviously number one on the list, but, long-term effect, I don't know. I think it would be too early to say any of that. But, you look at the other way and say, I think it's important to note both parts of this, fair or not, that if these leagues do go and try to play and disaster happens, well, then what? And, that's not, impossible either. And I think that that's something for folks to remember as well. And I'm certain of it, that at the SEC commissioner level, that is on Greg Sankey's mind as well. I think if you listen closely to a lot of the stuff he has said, it's also been, we reserve the right to pull the plug on this whenever we want to. It's just, we're going to wait a little bit longer and see what happens. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But I also wonder, what if they have to get to a point where they say we're not playing? Is that going to be met with the same level of, frustration and anger and outrage and everything else? I guess we'll have to see, if that happens. I guess we'll have to see. I hope they play. I hope somebody can make it through. That would be great for everybody involved, safely anyway. But I think we just don't know. And that's the hardest part right now.
Well, whether you're 18 or you're 80, you've never known fall without Michigan or Big Ten football.
Yeah.
And, and I don't know about you, Nick, probably won't hit me until this coming Saturday when there is football to watch. And I think that's when the reality of the decision will start to set in for me. It is going to be so strange to watch, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me it's I'm trying to think the same thing for myself. Like, when is it going to finally sink in? Because I think I agree with you, Mike. It hasn't yet. I just, even knowing what I know about, how firm the Big Ten presidents were about this decision, you still have this thing in the back of your mind, like, well, maybe they'll change their mind, right? And they haven't. But I don't know. I wonder what it's going to be like in October when when things are starting to change and the leaves are changing on the Saturdays. There's no tailgating around the areas. There's nothing. I've spent the last decade, whatever it's been, going to all these Big Ten cities in the fall and seeing all these places. And to think that, Iowa City's going to be dormant all fall is crazy to me. Madison, Ann Arbor, of course, and all these places that are just, they come alive in these, when the leaves start to change and everything else. And there's just this unique thing that's just not going to happen. And it just feels like it's just going to be another extension of what we've already had, which has been, 1 year where everyone's life just gets put on pause. And that's the hardest thing, I think, for a lot of people, where it's just like, what do you do? I've been asked that 1,000 times. What are you going to do on these Saturdays? And I'm like, I don't know. I have worked every one of them since 2006. I want to say something like that. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I don't know what normal people do on fall Saturdays. I guess I'm about to find out, but it is strange. And I don't know if it'll hit me probably. I don't even know if it'll hit me until we really get into the weather time where it really starts to feel like fall. I think that's when when the weather chills off a little bit and we still don't have, that's when it's going to be, if you drive by, or, I live in Ann Arbor. So if you drive by the stadium and everything's empty on a Saturday or whatever, it's just one long bye week, I guess. I don't know how else to put it, but very strange. I don't know if it'll feel normal at all. I hope it won't. I hope people continue to miss it. I know they will and are ready for it and want it back when it does come back. I am hopeful, of course, like everybody else, that they can figure something out and get rolling again here as soon as possible. But just a tough deal for everybody.
Well, final question for you, Nick, is as weird as it will be watching football without the Big Ten, There's still going to be some very good football to watch this fall with the Big 12, the ACC, SEC, if they get their entire seasons in, and might not be for reasons we like, but it's still going to be fun to watch the race to the playoffs. It'll be different. It should be intriguing.
Yeah, if anybody's playing football anywhere, I think for folks who are really diehards about it, I think it'll be good, good to watch. I mean, people were watching the FCS games last weekend, and I don't know how great of a game that was, but people got into it, whatever. I don't know. I mean, yeah, anything that, resembles it, I guess, is going to be something to whet the appetite. But, again, you look back and you say, boy, when if the SEC gets going for a couple of weeks and the NFL gets going and the Big Ten and the Pac-12 still aren't doing it, that's going to be very strange and very weird. And I think for the players, we've talked to some of the players. I think Carlo Kemp said it as well, like what you just said, Mike. It will not hit me until I sit down on a Saturday at my house or whatever, and I turn the TV on and I see Florida and somebody playing and we're sitting here. That's when it'll be really, really difficult, I think, for a lot of those guys to square. And, that's the other hard part is you're just waiting for the second part of the heartbreak to come, where you're just, and I think it's in some ways it feels like it might happen for a lot of kids all over again, where it's you're devastated on the day that it happens, and you go into that weekend and you see other kids that in some cases, these guys all know each other. Recruiting is a small world. Them playing a different play. I mean, it'll be very strange, very weird, and very tough for all the kids who can't get out there and play this year. But a lot of that is beyond everyone's control, which is tough to square.
It certainly is. Our guest on our Game Day segment this week has been Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic, who covers Michigan, Michigan State, and the Lions. So, Nick, I hope the next time that we talk here down the road in coming weeks, we have a football schedule, or at least a plan out there that we can say, okay, it's starting in January, here's what's going to happen. But at least we know that there are talks that are ongoing now with the Big Ten athletic directors, the chancellors, presidents, and in the coming weeks, we should have something to sink our teeth in, so to speak. So, as always, thank you for your time, and in the coming weeks, we'll get you back and see what's happening in college football.
No problem, Mike, and I just hope that the next time we get a schedule, it doesn't get ripped away in 3 days. So let's hope that the next time we see one, it's there to stay. But here's to that. But either way, I appreciate it, Mike. We'll talk to you again at some point soon, I'm sure.
Thanks to Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic for joining us today. He will be back soon. Next week, my scheduled guest is the angel of the big house, Detroit News beat writer Angelique Shengelis. So please tell your family and friends about the show and join us again next week. Remember to like us on Facebook and Twitter and rate the show wherever you get your podcast from. It's going to be an interesting week ahead. This weekend, college football kicks off for Conference USA, and there will be plenty of other action for us to watch on TV. And in just a few weeks, the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 will swing into action. And like many of you, I'm hoping the Big 10 will soon join them, or at least get their act together and make a decision on when to play. But we shall see. That does it for another show. Thanks for joining me, and have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!